My name is Jensen Ueda. I'm an extension agent for the University of Hawaii at Manoa's College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources. And I work with farmers across the state and some across the US, providing education and outreach as best as I can. Soil sampling is basically going through your field and collecting a bunch of soil from select fields and taking that soil, submitting it to a laboratory. That laboratory will analyze the sample and then give you results based on your submission. And so selecting the right fertilizer for the crop with the right amounts will help to reduce the cost of fertilizer. It'll allow you to select cheaper versions of fertilizer because you might not need the other nutrients that are in the fertilizer blend. And those blends are typically more expensive than mono fertilizers like urea and ammonium nitrate. It also helps to minimize your negative impact for introducing too much of any one fertilizer. So if you keep adding more and more of these blends and the plant's not taking them up, then you will result in an excess of these nutrients. And by having too much of any one nutrient might negatively impact the uptake of the other nutrients because there's so much of that nutrient, it might not allow the uptake of the other nutrients. And you think that you're putting more fertilizer down, but you might not be putting the right fertilizer down, and so your plant might not be growing as well as it used to be because it has too much of any one nutrient. So typically I recommend an annual soil sampling at minimum. It helps you learn how your soil is changing throughout the year, every year. And at least one sample per field will help to manage that field in particular. And then I would say before the crop goes in the ground is when you want to do the sample. And that helps you understand what the soil is like prior to planting. And a lot of fertilizers need to go in the ground prior to planting. So knowing what the fertility is before you put the crop in the ground is important so that you can put the right fertilizer in the ground prior to planting so it has the right nutrition for the length of its season. Because a lot of fertilizers, if you put it in after the fact, it might not be taken up by the plant appropriately. So having it put down correctly at the right time also increases the use of that fertilizer. It's a very good tool to use to make management decisions of which fertilizers to use and when to use them. You can correlate or you can match your sample with other reports of how much fertilizer is needed for the crop itself, and it'll allow you to know how much fertilizer of any one nutrient to put down at any time. Typically, the results that you're going to get are mostly nutritional, so it's the nutrients that the plant needs to uptake. There are some labs that can test for microbiology, so it can test for, I think, down to like colonies of fungal and bacterial colonies, and that will tell you kind of like how healthy your soil is. You can test for nematodes, good and bad nematodes. You can test for heavy metals, so if there's heavy metals in the soil, you can test for that too. Those are typically not what the plant needs to grow, and they could negatively impact. Other components are like how much carbon you have in the soil and how much organic matter is in the soil, and that helps you kind of understand the health of your soil and that your management practices are benefiting the health of your soil while producing optimal crops. Typically what I recommend is you take 20 subsamples. So a subsample is just a small scoop of soil from 20 locations randomly throughout the whole field. And the more uniformly you space it out, the better the sample will be. It'll cover more area uniformly. And typically what I do is I'll clear the surface of any organic debris, and I'll take a spade or shovel down to a 6 to 8 inch depth for vegetable crops. Take that soil, throw it in a bucket. At the end of collecting 20 samples in that bucket, I'll mix it with that shovel or that spade, and then I'll take about a quart Ziploc size of soil in the bag, tie the bag up or zip the bag up, label it with the field number, the date, and then submit that sample to a lab to get tested for the nutrition. And it doesn't have to be all at the same time, right? There is a cost to soil sampling, so every quarter of the year you could take a sample from the field, and then the next quarter you take the next field, the next quarter you take the next field. So every year you take a sample from each field separately, right? Then that way you're only submitting one sample, you're only paying for one sample, but you're still getting results annually for that particular field. If a crop looks like it's not healthy, you can go in the field, take a soil sample, submit it. You can even take a leaf sample to match the soil sample, so you can see if it is in the soil, why isn't it taking it up in the tissue? But yes, you can take the sample throughout the field while the crop is in the ground. Typically it's before you plant, so that stuff like pH will come back in a soil sample, and to adjust the pH once the crop is in the ground, it's too hard because the calcium carbonate will just sit on the surface. It'll be too hard to get it down into where the roots need it, because you can't till the field once the crop's in the ground, right? So by putting it on prior to planting, you can incorporate it into the soil, and then the crops can go back into the ground after you incorporate it, and then you don't have to worry about it throughout the crop cycle. Okay, so some of the tools that you would need for soil sampling include a bucket, a plastic bag. A Ziploc works best, but any plastic bag will work that holds the soil. A spade or a trowel or a shovel, something to take the sample, and then a pen to write down your field name. So the first step is to label your bag with the sample name and number. So this is field 5, and today is 6-8-23. So I have the date and the field number of the sample I'm taking. So we save that bag for later. You can hold it in your pocket if you want. Then next we're gonna take our bucket and we're gonna take our spade, and you wanna make sure you take the samples all the way across the whole field, and that way you get a more uniform result for the whole field itself. I'll go down about 6 to 8 inches, take a sample, and that's my first sample. We'll go to our next location, same thing, about 6 to 8 inches, take a sample, throw it in the bucket. We're gonna do this 20 to 25 times throughout the whole field. So this is 19. It's 20 subsamples. And then after you've collected all 20 samples, you're gonna take your trowel and you're gonna try and break up some of these clumps. And you're gonna mix the soil as best you can, so it's nice and uniform. And then you're gonna take your plastic bag, your Ziploc, and you should have about that much soil after you got your 20 samples mixed in. And then for me, I use these plastic bags, so I just tie them in a knot. And then I submit this to the lab, and they'll do the analysis for you on the soil.